Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have on a really special guest and a topic out of, I think we're at like 250 episodes that we've never dived into in a deep fashion. And we're going to do that today. We're going to talk about how you can just smash your targets. And this is what Stephanie Pilon, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Singular, is going to talk about here today without paid media. So we all know that we have to have a balance, right? And that in a lot of ways, for all of us as B2B marketers that are in ABM motion, that we've seen returns diminish in our paid media. And we have to think about new ways that we're approaching the market and carving out our space. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Now, Tiffany, I know also you've got a great background. You started out in sales, right? And so in terms of a mindset, in terms of a CMO and a marketer, how you're enabling the whole sales motion, that's going to be a part of what we talk about here today, right? You also a big product marketer, but just the fact that you're smashing your targets and you're going in front of the board and you're saying, here's what our goals, here's what we achieved, and you did it all without paid media. I think that's just a major accomplishment. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background before we get started, if you don't mind.
Thanks so much, Steve. So actually, yeah, I grew up in sales, which I think is an interesting thing to end up in marketing at the end, but I was the only salesperson that was really interested in researching the customer. So actually from research, did I go over to product marketing and then ultimately leading marketing division, which I find incredibly exciting and still really working closely with sales, of course, and also with our customers. I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation where I'm saying like, hey, paid marketing, do you really need it for what we're doing? Where our customers are absolutely using paid marketing. So actually Singular is an end-to-end measurement platform for marketers who are usually marketing an app. So it's really measuring mobile app performance. And of course, we're partnering with big companies who are doing paid marketing. And I'm sitting here saying from a B2B marketing perspective that maybe it's not as necessary as we thought it was.
Well, I love it. I love that you framed that. Thank you for doing that. Here's what I want to do. I want to get right in and just talk like why paid media isn't the growth lever that it used to be.
Okay, well, I think paid media can still work in a lot of instances. And I don't want to have this like blanket statement that it doesn't work because I think it really depends on what you're after. I think for B2C, it's fantastic. I think all of us have just gone through our Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and I'm sure we've clicked on some emails that came through. Or maybe if you're on social media, you're seeing all the ads that are popping up and it's prompting you to shop. But when it comes to B2B, and especially in the industry that I'm in, where the ICP is pretty specialized, the TAM is not as big as we would probably want it to be, and it's a long sales cycle. So you're not really getting that instantaneous click that you might get from paid media, and it's going to convert into something really quickly. So it is a long game that we're talking about. And paid media to me is a bit of a black box where you can test things out, but the return is just not there. And when I've compared it using reams of data over many years, so think of, I don't know, dozens or more than a dozen quarters worth of data, it just wasn't backing out. So this is really why we've had some pivotal shifts and we're not really focusing on paid media as a channel as it was within our business.
I love how you talk about that as a channel because in our last conversations, you talked about how you and your team and the tools that you use are the channel.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because, how we're framing it is, when you're looking at the cost of acquiring a customer, right? You're looking at all the different costs that are in there. And with paid media, it can be quite a linear calculation. Where with us, we're looking at the tooling. I'm looking at my people. We're the paid marketers, right? We're being paid to go out and market and actually bring that pipeline through. So I think it's really important that we have this distinction that even though I might not be spending, tens or dozens of thousands of dollars every day on Google or other platforms to bring in business, that we ourselves are paid and we're doing a lot of work across a number of different interesting programs to actually target the ICP and get them through the door.
So if you could just give us some examples of what you're talking about, because you made a comment that personally, as a B2B marketer, you don't ever use paid media. This is the channel that you're smashing the targets with. So If you wouldn't mind, like, give us some just examples of where you and your team spend a lot of time.
Sure. I guess I would use it really loosely that we almost have free promotion. And what I mean by that is it's not our customers, which that is great free promotion. We do have free promotion through our customers, but we have really tight programs with partners. So partnership programs are a fantastic way of us actually getting new leads through the door. And we've created an immense program with partnerships. So with that, that means we might be doing big gated assets that we're not doing paid promotion against, but we have big gated assets where we're bringing in leads, but we partner with, between 5 to 10 different partners to do distribution on those unpaid programs. We also have webinars that we do distribution with partners. So those are bringing in leads. And recently we've started doing something that we call precision outbound. And what that is really taking a TAL, a target account list, enriching that with first, second, and third party data, and then figuring out of that TAL, who is, for lack of a better term, our freshest fish that we should go try and fish from the lagoon. So this is what we're doing. And this list is given to the go-to-market team. And it's really sort of a marriage of all of us to go after these accounts together.
And I know you're like huge in looking at the data and then using automation tools. I know that you're a big fan of Clay. If you were to tell folks that are listening in here, the amount of data that we have today, it's almost overwhelming. It's more data than we've ever had before. But you're using the data and these automation tools like Clay to really make sure those freshest and, nurturing those leads. Tell us a little bit about how you're using Clay and you're using that data, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure all of us have different data points that we collect on our own. So you might be having what you might call your first party data that might come through HubSpot, for example. So you can see who's landing on your site. You might have second party data or even third party data. So for our purposes, there are companies that we're able to get really good third party data. So that could be things like in my industry, like an SDK install. And it really depends, I think, highly on the industry you're running in and what those signals could be. What we are able to do is we're able to grade those signals. So we make a decision on a scoring model, if you will, on what we want to allot to each one of those signals if that signal is present. And then we apply that model dynamically within Clay. So Clay, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm sure they do a better job of what I'm going to do right now, but it's basically, I think of it like the smartest Excel table you've ever imagined because it's plugging in to all of these different third-party tools that then you can use to enrich your own data. So you might not need to have, for example, a subscription to a third-party data aggregator. You could just do it all in Clay. So it's as simple as starting to build a table with a bunch of companies, let's say. Then you can fill in the right persona that you want to go after, and then you can enrich it from there. And for us, we do that in Clay and then bring it back into Salesforce so that Salesforce remains our source of truth as a business.
And where do you do your automations from? Is it from Clay? Is it from another platform?
Some of it runs in Clay. And then we also use Zapier and we also use N8N. So we're maybe agnostic on where we're doing things. I think in the next year, we'll probably have to make a decision of where we want to run the majority of our automations. But for now, we're sort of testing different tools at the moment to see what is best.
And the reason why I'm like digging in so deep here is that when you're talking about you and your team or the channel, it's really you're overseeing the system that you're building here from which data you're collecting, how you're aggregating it, how you're scoring it, and then how you're putting it into these automations and reaching out into the market, into that smaller market, right? That ICP that is really well defined. I love that. I think we could do a whole podcast just on that and what you're doing here. But I'd also like to talk about this can be something that you're doing internally is in the marketing department, but you've got to have alignment across the organization, not only with sales, right? The rest of the C-suite, the board and what you're doing. And you talked about literally like needing to rebuild trust and KPIs and behaviors. And you actually changed a lot of your team over. You did a big job in organizationally inside the company getting ready to implement this system? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you did there.
Sure, yeah. So when I joined, I was actually the first ever CMO to be within the organization. They never had a senior person within the marketing department at that exec level. So that was big boots to fill, I think, as a number one. And I came in and I kind of had to right size things. So we were very heavy on product marketing, which even though I come from product marketing, I could notice right away that we were quite heavy on that side. And we weren't as heavy, let's say, on demand gen. So it really took some reorganization to make sure that we were focused heavily on the demand gen side, that we were actually building in all these automations and this sort of methodology on what we needed to do to take us to this next level. And actually just some of the more basic things like, running nurture programs and things that had just never been done before. So really setting this new foundation that we can then build off of in the coming quarters, actually in 2026.
And you actually established new KPIs and you changed over team members. Why on both? Like, what was important in this mix that you're doing?
So first of all, I think the KPIs were really, really important. I'm a humongous believer in OKRs. So I actually came in as the exec champion of OKRs to the business. So all of us now are working off OKRs. And I just find it a fantastic way to ground your team in what we need to be doing. And then it gives us the ability to say no as well, actually. So it can be quite a powerful tool of focus and also of allowing people to say no to things that don't fall into that rule set. That's one thing. The second thing is I changed attribution internally. So no longer can we look at like 30 or 60-day cycles, knowing that a sales cycle is much longer. We needed a much longer window of attribution for the things that we were doing. For example, if we're running an in-person event, which I think is in a fantastic way of actually building pipeline, we needed, between 6 to 12 months runway to actually realize some of that closed won opportunity that can come from these events. And the other part was alignment within the organization. So actually aligning that GTM team on all of the things we're doing, which I do believe OKRs help with that because you're having a shared goal actually amongst us on, we want to hit this pipeline. We want to hit this revenue amount. Okay. How can we, as the leaders within the go to market operation, get there and instruct our team to get there?
And you did a lot of work in terms of you changed the team. You let people go, you brought new people in. Was that because there was some resistance on the team? They didn't have the right skill sets? Because high performance teams are, that's what makes the huge difference in a business, right? So what is it about how you created your high performance team that you would want to share here?
Really, it was right sizing. It's an unfortunate thing when you have to let people go. It's awful. And, when you're joining a company and you're inheriting a team, unfortunately, you have to sometimes unwind some of the mistakes or some of the decisions that were made before you. So in this case, it was really right sizing from some sub departments of marketing to ensure that I had the right budget and people budget that I could bring more talent to the demand gen side and that more digital focused side, if you will. So things like GTM engineering, also demand gen were really, really heavy focus, knowing that we need to do so much more with automation than we had before.
And if you could, inside of that team and then inside of the company in total, you and I talked about how important the culture is, right? Explain maybe a little bit your philosophy on the right culture that lets that team operate at its fastest and its best and most efficient and most productive.
That's a great question on what allows it to be the most productive. In my opinion, it's one having really tight goals so that we absolutely know what we need to do. Everyone is empowered to do the things that they need to do. I've hired and some of the people that were already in place are just absolute professionals. We tend to hire A people, right? So we're hiring people that absolutely know their domain. They're not needing me to explain something to them. So they're almost like coming back, there's this philosophy, right? That you're supposed to hire people that are 10xing you in some way or adding value. So never hire the same person as you. You're supposed to hire people that are looking around the corner, who know the blind spots before you know them. And this is really what we've developed within the marketing team now. So in terms of culture, it's really about hiring the best people that we possibly can that absolutely know their domain and that they're able to actually just do the job that they intended to do. So we're not getting in their way. We're unblocking them. We're breaking down silos. We're making sure that they feel empowered to do the best work that they possibly can. I'm always telling them, like, this is not the last job you're ever going to have. We all know that. Try and think of all the things we're doing as CV building exercises, these projects, and they're successful. It's fantastic. This is your story arc to the next job. So I really have that sort of way of managing and leading people versus micromanaging or even worse, getting caught up in all the details.
You twice in there talked about empowered people. How do you empower them? Like, what's the key to them feeling like I'm empowered to do what I think is right, what I think is best, collaborate with the team, obviously, get approvals, but how do you empower them?
I think it's giving them the ability to make decisions on their own, knowing that I am there as a trusted advisor for those decisions. I'm not the one that's leading the decision at the end of the day, though I might be the one that's signing off on the decision, but I'm really giving it to them to be in control of their domain. So in regards to demand gen, I wasn't laying out like, this is your 90-day plan when I hired someone. This is exactly what I want you to do. I wanted them to come to me and analyze everything and then give me advice. Like, this is what we should do. Okay, great. Let's go and do that now. What do you need in order to do that? How can I unblock that for you? What tools do you need versus the other way around? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, I run a podcast in the HR and talent acquisition industry, and I've interviewed CTOs and CEOs and CFOs and all kinds of people and CMOs on that podcast, chief people officers. One of the things that comes up consistently is that we can't have our teams be in fear of failing because it's a natural part of trying something new and trying to push the envelope, right? And so I took that from what you were saying just in different words, and I wanted to make sure that that was a correct interpretation of what you're saying is you're asking them to envision and develop a plan and what to do, but at the same time, knowing that it's not all going to work and that's okay. That's all right.
I believe that's also part of like the philosophy of OKRs, right? You should never be achieving for 100%. And in the beginning, actually, we were getting 100% or sometimes even 120% of our objective. And I quickly realized, well, we should be getting 70%. That's great. That's A plus is 70%. And if we're overachieving, that means we didn't make it hard enough. And it goes in line with what you're saying as well, that, we shouldn't be afraid to fail. 70% is not a fail. That's really good. But a lot of people need to get 100%. So it can be sort of hard to grapple with when you introduce this sort of new type of goal setting, that it's okay to not be getting 100% because you obviously know you've shot for the moon. You're trying to get the craziest number, the craziest target you possibly can, and you're working quickly and in an agile way to get it. So it's not always going to work out. It's okay.
In fact, it's designed into the system, right? Like you said, if we're always hitting, then we just haven't tried hard enough. I love the way you put that. I'm going to use that in the other podcast. Thank you. I want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning when you introduced yourself. You said, I started out in sales. I grew up in sales, but I was like the only salesperson that really wanted to research the customer. Tell me just a little bit about the need to operationalize the voice of the customer. And that was such a significant part of the growth engine itself. What did you mean by that?
I guess there's a lot of parts to unpack there. And maybe I could talk a little bit about one of my first projects within this role, which was a repositioning project where it was really important for me to understand what it was we're selling, which I do know because I've worked at our competitor before. So I do know exactly what we're selling, but to position us in a specific way. And in order to do that, you really need to understand the customer. You really need to understand someone's pain. You really need to understand the problem that you're trying to solve for somebody. when you're selling them something. Why should I buy this? How is this going to help me? And I think there's this adage that it's either, saving money, making money, or saving time, right? Those are the three things. And you really need to go beyond that and really understand what it is that you're helping somebody with. And so during this exercise, we're talking to a lot of customers. Fortunately, we have Gong, so we have access to like a ton of call logs, but that's not perfect either. I think you get a lot more out of having really one-to-one qualitative interviews with people. So an exercise that we also did was they sent out emails to everyone asking to have conversations. And I ended up speaking to a number of lapsed accounts. So people that had decided not to work with us any longer, as well as people that had never decided to work with us, to really understand why not? What could we have been doing differently? How do we solve this? So these things like getting in front of the customer and getting that early feedback are tantamount to be able for us to have the right content, the right messaging on our website, that right go-to-market motion that we need to have in order to increase our revenue and ultimately grow faster.
So voice of the customer, there was a McKinsey study that came out from 2023, and it said that it's not only the greatest opportunity for ideation and innovation, but that less than 15% of companies actually execute well on a voice of the customer program. Yet none of those companies, nobody I've ever talked to would say, we're not customer focused. We're not customer first. We're all customer obsessed, right? We all say that we are, but what you're talking about there is actually saying, okay, I'm going to be very proactive about that. And Gong recordings from sales can be great, but those are conversations where, and I'm not talking about your sales team, but Gong did a big study and they said that the sales rep talks 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. And then when the prospect talks, they're reflecting back on what the salesperson was talking about. So it's a big product conversation, really, it's happening. And there's a shield you're being sold to, right? You're not opening up. And then customer success conversations are important too. But the number one goal in customer success is to cross sell and upsell. My personal belief, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that most companies use those sales conversations, those customer success conversations within the end are sales conversations to create familiarity with our prospects and our customers. And they substitute that for the voice of the customer, right? Maybe NPS scores, surveys, and things like that. But that deep, ongoing conversations that you're talking about, the one-on-one conversations, I think that's where the magic really happens. So I just wanted to how important is operationalizing voice of the customer? So that you're having those conversations on a regular basis.
I mean, I think it's incredibly important. So we're continuing to run the motion that I just told you about where we're talking to our lapsed or, never customers, the customers that we wish we had, right? And we actually created like an internal sort of process that we're calling our 6-figure club, for lack of a better term, where we have all of our biggest accounts and execs are assigned to all of these accounts. And what this is doing is really allowing us to have different conversations with these accounts. I'm a marketer, as you know, as I'm here, and who we sell to are actually marketers. So it's really, really nice to go marketer to marketer and have really honest conversation about how the business is going, the goals that they might be having. And maybe I could liken it to that thing where, you have a good cop, bad cop. So not to say that sales and CS are the bad cop, but I can come in a different angle than they can a lot of the time. And one of my favorite things to do actually is to ask, it's probably like a producty thing where I'm like, hey, walk me through your day. Like, give me your jobs to be done in a day. I really want to understand what you're working on, how you work, how you go through the dashboard, what type of reports are you looking at? Like, really to understand how they're using our product, which then allows me to unlock different value in that next conversation.
So to add to that, there was a woman on the podcast and her name's Effort Ravid, and she's 3-time B2B CMO. She's also a value accelerator advisor with Goldman Sachs. And her perspective was exactly like yours. She said, we should be spending no less than 20% of our time just talking to customers. And if we don't prioritize it at that level, we're not doing our job. Also, at the same time, Gartner, McKinsey, Forrester, Deloitte have all said that the CMO should take the mantle on as the chief customer officer, right? Like most B2B companies, there's not one person that's really in charge of the voice of the customer, right? We all kind of have conversations, we all have it in our head, but then turning that into something that we can execute on, that we can actually use to drive our entire pipeline is a very different thing. And this is the last thing I'll say from another person I want to have you reflect on it. She was a 3-time B2B CMO, came on the podcast. She was a CMO at IBM, Cisco, GE, ran the customer program globally at Nielsen IQ. And she said, Steve, when she came on the podcast, she goes, I just want to talk about one thing. And I'm like, okay, what would that be? And she said, the lack of execution. It's where all good strategy goes to die. If the voice of the customer is that important, how do you take it out of your head, the other executive's head, right? How does it make it into the teams and execution in the pipeline? How do you execute on it?
That's such a big question. So how do you operationalize, I guess, the voice of the customer? So everything that you're learning and then put that into a strategy, but still execute on the strategy, which I think is a really important thing. It can't just be a pretty slide that we're talking about and saying, oh, good, this year we're going to have the voice of the customer. We're going to make sure we do it. So I think there's a number of ways. And I think we're very lucky that we're marketers. When you're in marketing, what do? You're actually creating a lot of copy, you're creating a lot of content, and you're trying to engage that audience in some way and move them through a funnel in some way. And when we think of a funnel, I mean, I never think of a traditional funnel, by the way. I'm not that old school where I'm like drawing a funnel and thinking about the stages. But in any case, there's different messages and there's different ways that you're going to want to bring people through to discover your products and understand. And I think understanding, if we go back to the fundamental part of your customer or your future customer, is really understanding them at a very deep empathetic level. You're then able to communicate properly to them. And it's not, the sales part is probably on sales enablement, right? How do we get better at doing discovery? What are the 3 value selling things that we want to get across on every single call? How do we not bore people on a demo? How do we get to the things that really matter to them and distill it down so that it becomes exciting during a demo? And all of this actually starts in marketing, if that's how your marketing team is operating. So, sales enablement is usually sitting with product marketing. From a content and messaging point of view, that's also product marketing and maybe your integrated marketing. So we have the power within marketing to harness all of the information that we're getting from voice of the customer and then turn that into the programs that we're running quarter on quarter. You can have the same program. You can have your programs like your events and your partnerships and content and your outbound. And then you might be just refining that message as you're learning along the way from that qualitative and quantitative feedback that you're gathering from your customers.
That could be an hour-long conversation, just that right there. Here's what I'd love to do is we've talked about so much here. And our poor human brains, we can only remember a few things at a time. What would be like the most important thing that you would want other CMOs, CROs, CEOs, primarily B2B companies that are in an ABM motion, what would you want them to take away from today's conversation?
Maybe you need to do it in your business. Not everyone is so lucky that they have deep partnerships and they can do different distribution and think about things in different ways. But what I would say is that you in a company, whoever you are, you sit on a lot of data. So start with that data. Start looking at that data. Start understanding what are the commonalities between the deals that you're winning. Start reverse engineering that because that is how you're going to develop that scoring model. That is how you're going to figure out what signals will lead you to that fresh deal down the road. And until you have that right, I mean, it's just not going to work out for you. You're going to be flying blind and throwing money at things that are not going to be converting in the same way. When you get to a place where you understand your customer so well, going back to the voice of the customer, you understand what makes them want to buy and at what time, because time, especially in SaaS, is of the essence. we're looking at like 2-year lock-in periods, sometimes 3-year lock-in period. So it really is about finding that signal and then using that signal to your advantage as much as you possibly can using the tools that you have at your disposal.
Well, Stephanie, I know one thing. There's going to be people that have questions here. That's for sure. Is it okay that I give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you if they had questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, good. So here's the deal. This whole podcast, the mission is to bring C-suite executives together and share what's working, what's not working, what are we doing, what's not working well, what trends and what opportunities we have. And if we do that and we share from the different insights and perspectives and experiences that we have, I call that the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. So I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute blast to talk about all of these nerdy data things and also nerdy things like talking to our customers.